Distinguished guests, dear colleagues and friends, following this magnificent symposium on water sharing, the French Committee on Dams and Reservoirs wished to organize a roundtable bringing together the major international institutional players in the water sector. The situation of our world is critical. Water is our most precious asset. Energy is totally indispensable. Dams and reservoirs have played a major role in our social and environmental development through our history. Today, we are at a turning point. Will our profession be able to meet the challenge? Now, I hand over to Mrs. Alison Bartle. Most of you know her, but she is from Aquamedia and publisher of Hydropower and Dams. She will moderate this roundtable. I thank her warmly for her contribution. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Michel. So I will say just a few words about the background concept for the roundtable and the format it will take. As Michel Lino just said, the symposium today was really magnificent. We've been talking in three parallel sessions about water sharing, multi-purpose reservoirs, and innovation, of course. I think before saying any more, though, we should commend Icold, and particularly the French Committee of Icold, for convening this roundtable. It's a very appropriate conclusion, I think, to the discussions in the symposium, and a very timely debate about the global water situation. I think there's probably been no more important time than the present to focus in some depth on global water issues, challenges, and the innovative techniques to planning, project design, construction, and operation of the future projects which are so badly needed in many parts of the world. First, in an era where it's possible to measure seismic activity on Mars and to contemplate unpiloted aircraft, unfortunately, in the water sector, domestic and industrial water shortages and a lack of food security still prevail in so many parts of the world, particularly the developing countries. And now, with increasing concerns about global warming and the changing hydrological conditions, we've reached a crossroads, I think, where more initiatives and actions are very urgently needed. The 17 Sustainable Development Goals adopted by the United Nations set very ambitious targets, and it seems to date that the success in meeting those various goals have been limited. And with 2030 looming only 8 years away, it seems highly unlikely that all those goals will be met. Renewed efforts, therefore, have to be made right now for the sake of present and future generations. And it's clear that the creation of more reservoirs, particularly multi-purpose ones, and also upgrading existing ones, and looking at adapting infrastructure to meet new challenges such as climate change, will be closely linked in fulfilling the UN objectives set out in those SDGs. Today, as we know, we're focusing on SDG number 6, and that's universal and equitable access to safe and affordable drinking water for all. But in fact, at least 5 or 6 SDGs have direct links with the provision of clean water resources and clean renewable energy, resulting, of course, from the construction of dams and creation of reservoirs. So Icold and CFBR have taken the important initiative of convening this roundtable, where some renowned experts are present to look at various water and energy challenges and the role that present and future reservoirs can play in alleviating some of the well-known problems. We're very privileged to have here representatives of the main professional associations playing a role in influencing global water policy. So the discussions will be in 3 closely interrelated parts, and that's certainly logical to begin with some facts and figures about the current status of global water resources and their distribution and projections about the future situation in years to come. So we're extremely fortunate to have with us Dr. Thierry Caquet. He has a doctorate in ecology. He began his career researching and teaching in the field of ecotoxicology at the Université de Paris-Sud. During his distinguished career, among many other things, he's coordinated research on the impact of pollution on aquatic ecosystems. Today, he's scientific director for the environment at INRAE, and that's the French National Research Institute for Agriculture, Food and Environment. He's particularly engaged there in coordinating the Institute's activities and programs in the field of climate change, both mitigation and adaptation, as well as risks to biodiversity and also sustainable water resources development. So we're going to sit together and work our way through the first sequence of this roundtable. So, Dr. Caquet, I'd like to start by asking you to give us a very brief overview of the current distribution of world water resources and taking into account, of course, the effects of climate change, what your perspective is for the future distribution and availability of water resources up to 2050 and maybe beyond.
Yeah, thank you, Alison, for this question, and thank you for the kind introduction. If I have the first slide, please. Yes, oh, here it is. So the question is very difficult to answer, but if you consider planet Earth as a whole, you know that around 2 to 3% of water is fresh water. And if we consider the need for humanity, we can say that there are enough fresh water available on Earth. Oh, kind of Larsen. But the problem with fresh water is that it's not available everywhere, every time. And there are many regions of the world, you can see on the map in orange, red, and brown, where water scarcity is very important. Water scarcity is the ratio between the availability of water and the need for water. And in many regions of the world currently, people are suffering from water scarcity, around 2 billion people. And if we consider also the question of groundwater, which is also a very important resource for providing water to people, about 1/3 of these groundwater systems are currently in distress, meaning that they are endangered by overexploitation of groundwater. So that's the current situation. And you all know that climate change is happening, and you know the IPCC report, perhaps you have read the last reports from IPCC, and the projections of climate are very, let's say, not optimistic at all, if I may say so. And with each degree of increase in temperature, every temperature on the planet, then the impacts will increase. And if we go into the middle of the century, about 2050, we can imagine that perhaps around 4 billion people on average will suffer from a lack of water. And this distribution of people suffering from lack of water is not uniform, of course, and most of them will be living in Asia, about 90 to 95% in Asia. So the situation is already very difficult and is going to be worse.
Thank you. Well, that's a very succinct snapshot of the global situation, which is an excellent way to kick off, and a little bit somber to see this belt of countries, as you mentioned, particularly Asia, where there are some stresses on available resources. Now it would be interesting to turn to some of the specific sectors for water consumption. And I'd like to ask you about the current water demand for domestic consumption and also for irrigated agriculture, very closely linked to food security. Could you maybe give us your perspective on the current situation again, and again predictions up to 2050 and beyond, of course taking account of the rapidly increasing population and economic development?
Yeah, of course, yeah. If we are going into the street and ask people what is important for them in terms of water, they will answer usually tap water, drinking water. But in fact, if we consider what is happening at the surface of the planet, the most important consumption part for fresh water is for agriculture. You can see it on this map with this regional, let's say, distribution of water consumption by sector. And the blue part of the circles represent agriculture, namely irrigation. And you can see that around 70% of total water use at the surface of the planet is dedicated to irrigation. But it's not luxury use, because if you consider what irrigation produces, you have 20% more or less of the total surface of the agricultural land that is irrigated at the moment, and this part, 20% of the agricultural land, produces 40% of total food production. We cannot afford to avoid irrigation. If we stop irrigation, we will have a sharp decrease in food availability on the surface of the planet. So we need to continue to irrigate, but in a more, let's say, sustainable way. And the question is how things are going to progress now. If we consider the statistics, there are no consensus, but more or less an increase of 1 to 2% per year of water consumption. And projecting in 2050, we can imagine to have a need for around 5,500 or 6,000 cubic kilometers per year, 20 to 30% more than now. And what is interesting is to see the lower part of the slide is that the increase that is anticipated is not really on agriculture. If we consider the OECD projections, it's more on the industry and energy use of water that will have this increase. And once again, Asia will be against the most let's say, important area of the world for water consumption, followed by Africa and other countries of so. But Asia and Africa will be the hotspot for water consumption in the future.
Thanks so much. Again, a wealth of information in a very short time, and we see again the stresses, as we know well, in Asia and Africa. Now, if we may, let's move on to another very important role of water storage, and that's the global transition towards renewable energy, and that's to say hydroelectric power itself, and also its role working in synergy with other renewables, intermittent renewables, such as solar and wind. So again, could we ask you for your overview of the situation today and predictions again up to mid-century and perhaps to the end of the century on how that situation will move?
Yeah. We can take the scenario for the International Energy Agency as a starting point, but all the perspectives in this field consider that without renewable energy sources, we will not be able to meet the zero emission scenario by 2050. And according to the EEA scenario, the NZE, scenario, we need about 2/3 of energy produced by renewable energy sources. And among these sources, of course, hydropower is already very important, you mentioned it, but we need to increase the part of hydropower, and the figures may differ, but if we take the IRENA projections, we need more or less 850 gigawatts more to be built in the future. If we want to attain to attain the objective of +2 degrees by the end of the century. And if we are more, let's say, voluntary to not to get above 1.5 degrees during the century, we need more than 1,000 gigawatts more. And the problem is that at the moment, there are a lot of projects around the world, you know it better than me, I'm sure, but most of them are not commissioned yet, and there are some projects that are ongoing, but it's not sufficient to have this contribution of hydropower to attain the zero emission scenario. And another point that is for me also important is that hydropower is at the nexus between the different sources of renewable energy. You can imagine, I've seen the photograph in the screen a few minutes ago, to have these floating photovoltaic panels on the reservoir, for example. And if you cover only 1% of the total surface of reservoirs around the world, you may produce up to 520 terawatts per year. So it's not negligible. Another key issue is to connect or to hybridize hydropower with solar or wind energy. For example, with pump storage. When you have electricity, you pump the water uphill, and then when there is no wind or no sun, then you can use hydropower to contribute to the energy production. And finally, perhaps another issue, perhaps some colleagues in the audience know this project in Switzerland, to connect or couple hydropower with hydrolyzers to have this hydrogen produced using hydropower. There's a dam, in this Schliffen Dam, that is currently equipped. And next year, if everything goes well, it will produce around 300 tons of hydrogen a year using hydropower as the primary sources with electrolyzers coupled to hydropower. So we cannot imagine to have only hydropower alone. It should be a thing with a, let's say, a distributed vision and a connection with other sources.
Absolutely, thank you so much. I must say, during my career, I've seen peaks and troughs of enthusiasm for hydropower. But I think now we're almost entering a new era, as you say, where there's so much more enthusiasm because of the synergy with other renewables and the undoubted need for clean renewable energy because of climate concerns and so on. So it's very gratifying, I think, that the parts of the world with the biggest problems we just saw also have the greatest potential, at least. So that's a goal to work towards, to help them unlock their potential. Finally, it would be great to come to the vital issue of water quality, I know a subject very close to your heart, and environmental protection. Dr. Kake, could I ask you to reflect a little bit on the impacts on water quality over the past decades and the associated effects on ecology and biodiversity, and how you see things going in this direction?
Oh, thank you. Yes, until now I spoke mainly on quantitative dimensions of water, but of course quality is also a matter of interest, because you cannot use water if its quality is very low or if it's unsafe. And if we consider the huge amount of work that has been done in many countries, including Europe, for, let's say, decades, and I do declare that the situation is, unfortunately, is not improving. The situation has worsened in the last decades. You can see this map on the slide, and we have the situation now in many areas of the world, in orange, yellow, and red there. You have degraded quality of water, surface water, especially due to human pollution, not necessarily chemical pollution by industry, but the first source of pollution is humanity itself. I mean, sanitation. At least 30% of persons in the world do not have access to sanitation. So all the residues from human metabolism, if I may say so, goes directly into the field and finally enter the water or groundwater. And if we consider the projections, the current projections, is that there are increasing concern about the pollution by human metabolism, of course, by nutrients, by hundreds of chemicals that may be very harmful for humans, but also for biodiversity and the ecosystem services that can be produced by biodiversity. And the projections, is the lower map on this slide, are not very good at the moment, because we are facing both an increase in the number of inhabitants at the world surface. We'll be around 12 billion, perhaps more, in a few decades. And we have some problems linked to climate change, of course. And finally, we can imagine that water pollution will intensify over the next decades. That's the global picture. But to be more optimistic, as a conclusion, I can say that locally, and when I mean locally, it's not only small places, but, for example, different countries may join their efforts to, let's say, collaborate, to have new resources of water or new reservoirs, for example, to produce high quality or fresh water, for example, for drinking. It's not only a view of what can be done or what could be done. It should be done because it's absolutely necessary for the future of humanity.
Thank you for ending on a note of optimism there, because I was afraid everybody came along feeling very cheerful today, and then they saw some statistics which are certainly very worrying.
That's the problem with this question of climate change, global change, water issues. If you are very pessimistic, then you see the world very dark and dull, but in fact there are signs of hope, and the question for me, or the issue for me, is to think in a systemic way, not only water alone, but with energy, with food, and with human welfare, as the sustainable goals that you were mentioning in the introduction are therefore thinking as a system,
yes.
not only separately in the
yes.
different points.
Absolutely. And actually, as we move in a moment to our next sequence, there will be perhaps even more optimism, because we've got some experts now who will go deeply into these challenges and perhaps have some ideas that will stimulate future actions. And it's a great opportunity to pool expertise, I think. But just before introducing the second sequence, I think you've actually covered massive topics on a global scale in less than 10 minutes. So that's absolutely amazing. We're so glad to have had you with us. And maybe I invite everybody to give a round of applause for Dr. Terry.
Thank you.
So the next hour will be spent hearing viewpoints from various experts, as I mentioned. We have renowned experts from various professional associations in the water sector. And to introduce them, I'd like to hand over to Emmanuel Grenier from the Icold Central Office, who will moderate this next part of the roundtable.
Thank you, Alison. Cool. Yeah, she deserves it. Also a round of applause. But she stays with us until the end of this roundtable. I now call Mr. Fauchon, Mrs. Debbie Gray, Mr. Michael Rogers, Mr. Ragab Ragab, and Mr. Satoru Ueda to join me here for the second sequence. So as you can see, we have brought together experts from around the world and from the most prestigious international organization dealing with water and dams to answer some critical questions for the future. I must add that there is one person, Mr. James Dalton, from the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, who will join us by video later on. So, I would like first to remind everyone here of the very strict rules of this roundtable. This is about time. We need short answers of 3 minutes at the maximum so that everyone can express themselves. Thank you in advance for respecting that. I will begin by asking Mr. Fauchon, the President of the World Water Council, that we have the pleasure to have with us. The first question. We have seen with Thierry Caquet that artificial water reserves are decreasing in absolute terms and even more so in capita. So my question is, are those reserves still sufficient to meet the current and future needs of humanity? You have the floor.
Merci. Je voudrais tout d'abord, parce que je n'ai pas pu le faire ce matin, I will speak French. Je voudrais vous souhaiter la bienvenue parce que, par le hasard de la vie, je suis aussi le président directeur général du parc Chano. Et donc, je voudrais à tous vous souhaiter la bienvenue pendant toute cette semaine. I would like to say you welcome for this week, and I hope that you will be satisfied by all the services that we are trying to provide. And I would like also to say welcome on behalf of the municipality of Marseille for a very pleasant stay in the city. Vous avez posé une question, mais vous avez fait la réponse. Donc je pense que je n'ai rien à dire. Vous avez posé la question de savoir si les réserves en eau sont suffisantes. Non, elles ne le sont pas. Ça a été très bien démontré auparavant. Elles ne le sont pas pour plusieurs raisons sur lesquelles il faut insister et sur lesquelles notamment les médias et les responsables politiques ne sont pas suffisamment bien informés. On parle beaucoup trop du climat et on oublie tout le reste. Aujourd'hui, nous avons à faire face à la démographie, à l'élévation des niveaux de vie, très consommatrices en eau, mais évidemment aussi à toutes les formes de pollution, qui ne permettent pas d'utiliser une partie de ces ressources en eau. Il y a l'urbanisation, la croissance des mégacités qui est plus consommatrice d'eau que le milieu rural. Toutes ces raisons font que, évidemment, nous n'avons pas assez de réserves en eau. Et le climat, c'est l'ultime injustice, comme nous l'a dit le roi du Maroc à la dernière COP, c'est l'ultime injustice qui va venir frapper les plus faibles, les plus pauvres, lorsque vraiment ces effets se feront sentir sur les ressources en eau. Alors, je crois, et pour respecter le temps, je crois qu'il ne faut pas véhiculer un message pessimiste. Je crois qu'il faut véhiculer un message optimiste. Nous avons les solutions, nous avons les réponses. Elles sont techniques, elles sont financières, elles sont institutionnelles. Il nous reste à travers le monde à convaincre les décideurs politiques et les décideurs économiques, ce qui n'est pas toujours le cas, il faut le dire, avec franchise, avec sérénité. Et le rôle du Conseil mondial de l'eau, grâce à vous tous, aux 400 organisations qui le composent, c'est de s'efforcer de convaincre que water is politics. Quand on aura fait ça, je pense qu'on aura fait l'essentiel du chemin.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fauchon. It's a difficult task in front of us, and I have an excellent example coming from Great Britain, because Professor Ragab Ragab, who is the president of the International Commission on Irrigation and Drainage, and he's also a researcher at the UK Hydrology Center, and he was telling me that for 30 years he was trying to convince UK authorities to plan for drought, and each time he was receiving the same answer: oh, come on, Great Britain, it's a rainy country, we don't need plans for drought. But now the drought is coming this summer for the first time in Great Britain. So I will hand him the microphone for also bringing his own answer to this question: do we need new water storages?
Thank you very much. I think from the ICID point of view is that the need for reservoir comes from the fact that we actually need to double the food production by 2050. And to increase the food production, you need to irrigate. And with the limited water resources, you need really to have water stored somewhere, and then you use it at the right time when the crops need it. So in ICID, as mentioned by previous speaker, we recognize that 70% of the freshwater resources globally are used for producing food. In some countries, that goes to 90% and even above 90. So it is really important for us is to have a steady flow, because agriculture and food production requires a steady flow, and you need to add the water when it's required. The other thing also for us, as Emmanuel just mentioned, in the UK is a water-rich country, but we get frequently some, now it's more frequently than before, drought events. And I have been trying to convince the British government to fund the drought projects, and finally, the last few years, that there was a huge amount of money given to us to study the drought. The results of that was we are going to have more severe and more frequent flood droughts in the future, and that would require that we need to have water to use during the drought event. And that actually requires more reservoirs and dams. The other thing for agriculture and food production, we need a steady water flow to apply integrated water management. You cannot apply integrated water management without guaranteeing a steady flow. And that's also a reason why we need more reservoirs now. The other thing is to add that in 1950, per capita share was 12,000 cubic meter per year. In 2000 was 7 4,130 per year. 2050 is reduced to 4,580,000 cubic meter per year, which means that by 2050 we'll have 1/3 of the one that we had and enjoyed in 1950s. So within 1 century, actually we lost 2/3 of our water, and we need to manage with 1/3. So there are so many really reasons why we need to have reservoirs, and also not only this, but the regulations of these reservoirs, and the regulators should allow farmers to get water during the high seasons, to store them when they are needed in the dry period. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. So I perfectly agree with Mr. Fauchon that climate change is not everything, but nevertheless, we're going to speak about the climate change because it raises some problems. And I will ask Mrs. Debbie Gray to take the mic. Mrs. Debbie Gray is the climate change officer at the International Hydropower Association. And I can't think of a better person to ask this question to. What is the role of dams and reservoirs in the energy transition?
Thank you very much, Emmanuel. In a word, hydro and reservoirs have a crucial role to play in the energy transition. Now, some of you might be thinking, I work for the International Hydropower Association. Of course I'm going to say that because my day-to-day job is to promote hydropower, isn't it? But as Dr. Kakem mentioned earlier in his presentation, it's actually not even the IHA who is pointing strongly to the need for more hydropower. There were studies done by the International Energy Agency, by RENA, which is the International Renewable Energy Agency, that look towards a world of 2050, a decarbonized world of 2050, where we can really meet our climate change targets. And in those projections, both of those institutions look to a massive growth of hydropower. Hydropower is going to play a dual role, even more so than it does today, looking forward to decarbonized role. First of all, hydro currently plays a strong role as baseload power. However, moving forward in a decarbonized world, we are going to need more electricity, and that is because we will have to decarbonize end uses that are currently run on fossil fuels. Here I'm talking mainly about transportation, industry, as well as heating. So we are going to need more electricity going forward, and we are going to need decarbonized electricity going forward. So the dual role of hydropower is going to be, first of all, to provide this baseload electricity, which we will need more and more of moving forward, but also it's going to play an increasing role in balancing the other renewable energies which are going to come onto the grid. Here, of course, I'm talking about wind and I'm talking about solar. These two sources are intermittent, so when the sun isn't shining and the wind isn't blowing, well, we need something to back it up. And the best carbon-free means of backing that up is with hydropower, particularly storage hydropower. There's also what is being called the hidden crisis within the crisis, and that is the the energy storage question. So when I'm talking about storage of energy with hydropower, I'm talking not only conventional storage, but also pumped storage. So the role of what the IHA is trying to do and what we showed in that report, we put together some policy recommendations to highlight to governments and to other policymakers the need for more storage and for the more hydropower and hydro storage moving forward. Because I don't need to tell anybody in this room that you cannot build a hydro plant in 3 to 5 years. The lead times for hydro are very long. They're very capital intensive projects. We're talking 10 to 15 years. So we have to start planning and thinking about it seriously now if we're going to meet our 2050 targets. However, there's one very important point which is promoted by my organization in association with other organizations, and that is moving forward, all hydropower has to be sustainable. What do I mean by sustainable? We have the tools to measure sustainability, and in fact, we launched the Hydro Sustainability Standard as a means of certifying hydro projects to be sustainable just last September. And finally, and I'll end on this, these principles that hydro is a clean, modern energy source that is crucial for the energy transition. We're going to need more of it, but moving forward, all hydro must be sustainable. These principles are enshrined in a document called the San Jose Declaration, which was also released at the World Hydro Congress last September. and presented to world leaders at the COP26 conference in Glasgow in November. So these principles are enshrined in this document, and this document is a good, was done in consultation with many shareholders, and I think it is a good baseline declaration on these principles that, again, we need more hydro. It's a clean, essential part of the energy transition, but moving forward, all hydro must be sustainable. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Debbie. So we have another aspect of climate change, that is the impact on water resources, and which is now proven according to the last IPCC report published this year. Now we are going to turn to Mr. James Dalton again from the International Union of Conservation of Nature. He's the head of the Global Water Program of IUCN, and he will answer his part of the question now.
Well, I think dams and reservoirs have always helped us even out natural hydrological variability. And they've also collected data and been important data providers to help us understand how hydrology is shifting due to climate change. The challenge is that we have many of these, many dams that are aging, and not even aging in the sense of the lifetime that they're built for, at 100, 150 years old, for example, but some that, like the Kariba Dam in Zambia, it's around about 55 years old, but they're suffering due to climate change. And I think that's because construction's always been built upon a certain level of stability, operating within boundary conditions of how we understand hydrology and a stable climate would be. But as climate is changing, that's making that much more difficult to deal with. And I think also keeping dams working within those changes of hydrology creates a series of mismatches or broken connections in the logic. For example, the operating rules of hydropower dams are going to have to change, and they'll require investment to cope with risk and also the opportunities for generation that climate change will bring. They'll also need to work more broadly in the dispatch of energy with other renewable energy options that are coming online, such as wind and solar and tidal. And I think large dams and reservoirs also need to be aware of changing legislation that's going to come down the pipeline over the course of the next 5, 10, 15 years to improve water ecosystem connectivity. Legislation is focused much more on water quality concerns, and legislation that's more aware of river flow improvements. And I think all of this requires investment and increasing collaboration with other water users. And if not, and if it's too difficult, then the end result will be stranded assets, and they will cost us billions, and we will have to deal with that.
Okay, it's less optimistic, huh? But anyway, he gave his answer. I would like to ask Mr. Ragab to add his viewpoint on the subject. It was repeated here that irrigation is the biggest water user. So could you also answer this question? What is the role of dams and reservoirs in climate change adaptation?
Thank you, Manuel. Well, irrigation, as I mentioned, needs actually a steady flow at the time when the crops need it. You cannot postpone irrigation. So we need to ensure adequate supply for food production at all the times. The other thing is that we need to protect agriculture from flood, and also we need to guarantee a water supply during the drought. The other thing is that in order to have integrated water management, as I mentioned before, we require to have a steady flow and a guaranteed flow all year long. And also there is another thing maybe not mentioned, is that dams and reservoirs, actually they help us to prevent sea level rise, especially in the lowland coastal areas. And I have been working myself on that project for the Ministry of Agriculture in the UK. There are really vulnerable areas, and they can be subjected easily to seawater inundation, affecting those lands for grazing or for agriculture. And there is a report saying that dams and the reservoirs they actually help reducing the sea level rise by up to 12%, which is significant. So also dams and reservoirs, they are really providing us with a steady and good aquatic conditions for fish, wildlife under a changing climate. The other thing is that we have, from my study as well, there is currently a gap between water supply and the demand, and by 2030, that gap between water supply and demand would be 40%. And really, to narrow that gap, we need to store water at the time of surplus, which means that we need to build the reservoirs to have that water. Given the groundwater level is now going down, and groundwater depleting in so many parts of the world. I have seen that myself in Crete, Masara Valley. I have seen that as part of my work on the Guadiana Valley in Spain, and I also have seen that in southeast of the UK. So there are so many countries, the groundwater depleted because the consumption is more than the recharge to the groundwater. So we need really to have that in mind. If there is no groundwater, the only option is to have a surface water. To have a surface water means dams and the reservoir. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we're all convinced of the necessity and the positive impact of dams, but we also know that there are negative impacts socially and environmentally. And that has created the consequence is that the pace of new dams construction has slowed dramatically, mainly due to this impact. Mr. Sato Ueda, you are the lead dam specialist at the World Bank. Would you tell us how to improve the projects to make them more acceptable by society?
Thank you very much for these important questions. And I would like to respond to the question covering 3 points. First one is this, not a direct answer, but from our perspective, the slowdown of construction of a new dam is likely to a number of factors, including the technical and the project preparation capacity, and also this liquidity challenge in the low and the middle income countries where many new dam projects are being pursued, as well as increased awareness to the environmental, social trade-offs involved in the construction of new dams. Now, just coming to the more point, straight to your point, to accelerate the project preparation process of new dams, it is important to address the environmental social aspect at the very beginning of the project identification and the project preparation phase. Strategic environment assessments can identify the environmental social risks and opportunities in a comprehensive manner. A failure to fully address an environmental social risk associated with new dams will undermine their overall benefits derived from new dams. Ownership and the capacity building of the client is crucial so that they can fully understand their environmental social requirements and also prepare their environmental social impact assessment and environmental social management plan in a quality and timely manner. Also, in addition to doing the project right, it is important to ensure doing the right project. It is critical to ensure that the new dam project will strategically fit into the country's long-term plan for economic development and also livelihood improvement. Third, the benefit sharing with local community is critical. As the main beneficiaries of new dams for water supply, hydropower generation, and so forth, typically is located much downstream of the dam. Recently successfully completed project funded by the World Bank, such as Trans-On hydropower project in Vietnam, and the Lompanga, the hydropower in Cameroon, included the local benefit sharing component with advocate guidance from the environmental social specialists under the World Bank and also under client. It is also important to assess and to capture the benefits of multi-purpose storage development for water supply, irrigation, and flood control, in particular for local communities. I stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We are going to hear the answer by James Dalton on the same questions, how to improve the projects to make them acceptable.
I think Icold needs to look at its position in the world of water storage, not just energy generation, but much more broadly around water storage. I think understanding storage connections with other options, so the links with built infrastructure and natural infrastructure, such as groundwater storage, managed aquifer recharge, the investment in watersheds upstream, not just for sediment management, but increasingly for natural water storage as well. And I think pushing the boundaries on the quality of the investments is important. Trying to achieve the hydropower sustainability standards is going to become much more critical, and those standards and criteria of the Climate Bond Initiative. And I think that's because, one, we need to strive for continuous improvement. The next dam must be better than all of the previous ones. But also, investors are going to be asking much more for these types of quality assurance that their investments are going to be able to cope within boundaries of the impacts and risks that climate change can bring. And I think also we have to consider other options for energy generation, to be honest. We're seeing companies become green energy companies, of which hydropower is only a fraction of their options available to them. And increasingly, hydropower is becoming costly for them due to the maintenance of hydropower, and that's mainly due to climate change impacts and the risk that changing hydrology brings to them. And I think Icold needs to reach out and work with a much broader set of organizations and bring its knowledge and its experience and its innovation around dams and reservoirs to the table so that it can share that experience, learn from others, and see what could become in the future.
Thank you. It has been mentioned already that dams are very long-lived infrastructures. One dam out of 3 was built more than 50 years ago. So we need to think how we can better use of the existing stock of dams and what is the evaluation of the needs and how to prepare for it. Mr. Sato Ueda, you have the floor on the subject again.
Yes, and in response to your questions, I would like to cover 4 points. The first one is the stock of large dams older than 50 years is rapidly increasing in many countries. It is critical to ensure the safety through sustained and sufficient operation and maintenance, and timely rehabilitation and the safety improvement of dams, covering both civil works and electrical mechanical equipment. Refurbishment and upgrading of hydropower generation system and water control facilities, such as intake and the spillway, will contribute to ensuring the long-term sustainability of dams operation. Second, it is critical to address reservoir sedimentation. Some dams have considerably reduced their storage capacity due to sediment deposit in the reservoir, which have negatively affected the dam's operational function for hydropower generation, the water supply, and so forth, whilst reducing the flood attenuation capacity and the dam safety. So it is important to assess and undertake required remedial measures in a comprehensive manner, including a catchment management and other techniques. Third, it is important to review the function and the capacity against the current surrounding conditions and needs, which may have changed over decades since the commissioning. Existing irrigation dams could install the hydro and also solar panel, and also multi-purpose dam could also enhance their function and capacity for water supply, hydropower generation, and flood control, and so forth, by introducing advanced hydromet monitoring, flood forecasting, optimal resolution, and so forth. This has already been tested in many cases. So this is one of the important elements for us to consider for dam rehabilitation. Moreover, with the changing role of hydropower from the baseload power to increasingly providing balancing services for the integration with the other renewables, many facilities, the operational regime may need to be adopted. Through these types of retrofitting and the reoperation of existing dams, they could make an additional contribution to green growth and climate change mitigation, whilst they're increasing adaptation and resilience against the intensified rainfalls and flood discharge. Fourthly, we should also help our clients enhance their intersectoral coordination between the entities for dams development and the management and other entities in charge of hydromet monitoring, forecasting, the seismic monitoring, the hazard assessment, including the debris flow, landslide, growth, and so forth in the catchment, as well as emergency preparedness, so that they can enhance the risk management structure in a more integrated manner. I stop here. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll now ask Mr. Michael Rogers, President of Icold, to bring his expertise on the subject.
Thank you, Emmanuel. And I'll take this opportunity just to thank you for inviting me here and to be part of this very excellent, distinguished staff, and thank our folks for being here, especially the young professionals, our engineers and scientists in the audience. I agree with Satoru. We make the best use of our existing dams and levees by keeping them safe. We can talk about sustainability, but a dam that is not safe is not sustainable. And so we must continue to work toward dam safety. A safe dam or levee that meets its design intent, its meaning that it's performing the benefits as it's supposed to, can last hundreds or thousands of years. In the United States, Hoover Dam, I completely expect that that will last 2,000 to maybe 5,000 years. And we know that dams can do that. The Proserpina Dam in Spain, not far from here, is over 2,000 years old. So sustainability in a dam that's 2,000 years old is there. And so the evolution for the challenges of tomorrow that we're talking about at this roundtable, I believe, has an important aspect of dam safety. This safety of dams as it combines with the changing knowledge and of the industry. And Satoru mentioned this, that we learn about dam design as engineers and scientists and design of levees every day at conferences like this. And we also learn about each individual dam that has its own character and its own unique problems every day. And what the challenge for tomorrow is to match those, make sure that the dams, as they are performing, as they are evolving, match the current design criteria and the safety criteria that we learn and we present and that we talk about at these conferences, that there's that connection that's made between the designers and the owners and every day at their projects. That's my contribution.
Thank you, Michael. Professor Ragab wanted to add a little point on this subject too.
Thank you. One actually of the reasons that the lifetime of dams gets shorter is the sedimentation and the reservoirs. And take example of Aswan High Dam in Egypt. And I don't really see too many funding going into erosion control and upstreams. And I think the World Bank, I have next door neighbor here, maybe should pay attention to the root cause. Why actually the dams, they have a shorter life? Because sedimentation and siltation behind the dams. That's one thing. The other thing of dam safety, which I saw myself in North African countries, is that when they build the dam, they don't consult the hydrologist. They consider building dam as a civil engineering exercise. And you work on the mean flow, the annual mean flow, without taking into account the extreme events and the peaks of the flows. And when you have extreme event, all of a sudden you have overtopping of the dam. So my suggestion as a hydrologist is that civil engineers should work hand in hand with hydrologists and to take into account extreme events, especially with the climate change now knocking on the door, not to consider the mean flow as we did in the past. Thank you.
Thank you for this important message, and I think you have been heard. The subject of dam safety has already been introduced by Mr. Rogers, and I will hand over the mic to him also again, because he has made dam safety a top priority of his presidency time at Icold, and he has fought to make sure that we don't forget this most important subject. So, Mike, you have the floor.
Thank you, Emmanuel. I think dam safety is an important aspect of what we do. There's no guarantee that dams are going to be safe. We must do our work each and every day as individuals about the work that we do sitting at our desk or sitting out in the field as we work on our projects. And when I talk about safety, it's not just the design, the foundations, the structures. We must also remember the safety of the day-to-day operations, the people who operate the dams, the people who are in and around the dams, both that work on these dams and the civilian recreational users and others around our dams. When any one person loses their life because of a dam, either because of the operation or because of an incident at a dam, then the whole industry suffers, and we suffer catastrophically. And it should hit us all. And I've mentioned on several occasions that since I've become president, there's been several dam incidents around the world where hundreds of people have lost their lives and tens of thousands have been impacted. This must be on our minds every day as we, as individual engineers, scientists, operators, owners, regulators, as we come to work and we take the responsibility and the care for these critical infrastructure projects that are necessary to support humanity and are going to continue to be in demand as we move forward. These are important aspects of the work that we do, but I think the most important work comes down to each and every one of us as we sit and do our work every day and evaluate the work that we do. Is this making the dam safer, or what can I do? Only when it becomes personal and we have that in our mind that this is a sacred responsibility, a core value of our organization and of each of us, that will make a difference. Thank you very much, Emmanuel.
Thank you, Michael. I have another question for Mr. Loïc Fauchon, and I will begin with a quote by Kamala Harris, which is the US Vice President, who said on April 7, "For years and generations, wars have been fought over oil. In a short matter of time, they will be fought over water." What will be the future of hydro diplomacy?
Water wars, the media phantasm. I have great respect and consideration for the Vice President of the United States, but where is she coming from? From California. She's elected close to the Hollywood studios, so I think they want more and more works and move from Star Wars to Water Wars. No, come on, be serious and be professional. Nous allons nous battre pour l'eau, mais ce sera une bataille pacifique. Ce sera une bataille pour être capable d'appréhender les challenges importants qui nous attendent. Le principal challenge va être de nourrir la planète face à ce que j'évoquais, la démographie, l'évolution du climat, etc. Alors, vous avez mentionné le mot hydrodiplomatie que nous avons mis en exergue il y a 25 ans au Conseil mondial de l'eau. Assurer le développement de la planète, créer des infrastructures, ça crée des tensions, ça crée des conflits. Ces tensions, ces conflits, il faut savoir les appréhender, il faut savoir les prendre en compte. Bien sûr, aujourd'hui, construire un barrage, ça crée des difficultés et parfois des problèmes dans la population. Construire des centrales nucléaires, créer de l'éolien, tout cela crée des difficultés. Alors, il y a là encore des solutions, des réponses positives. Soyons positifs. Au passage, j'aurai l'occasion de le dire mercredi, il nous faut des barrages. Il nous faut des barrages dans le monde, il nous faut des barrages en Europe et il nous faut des barrages dans le pays où nous sommes aujourd'hui, où on n'a pas construit un barrage depuis 70 ans. Et il faut le dire le front haut. Il faut le dire sans baisser la tête. Il faut dire oui, nous avons besoin de stocker l'eau. Oui, nous avons besoin d'eau pour créer de l'énergie. Alors il faut développer différentes formes de dialogue. Dialogue, dialogue, dialogue. Nous sommes, après avoir été concernés par les tensions entre la Turquie, l'Irak et la Syrie, nous sommes en ce moment sur le difficile sujet du Nil, avec la construction du barrage Renaissance. Nous avons rencontré il y a quelques semaines la présidente d'Éthiopie, après avoir rencontré le président, le maréchal Sissi au Caire. L'heure est au dialogue. L'heure n'est pas à laisser croire aux populations que l'on va faire mettre en avant les militaires pour régler le problème de la construction d'un barrage. Et donc c'est pourquoi nous avons appelé à Dakar, au récent Forum mondial de l'eau, à un réexamen de la question de la médiation internationale. Car il y a 275 ou 280 bassins transfrontaliers dans le monde. Il y en a une quinzaine où il y a des tensions et 260 qui fonctionnent correctement. Pourquoi? Parce qu'on a mis en place des dispositifs de dialogue permanent. Nous avons donné le Grand Prix Hassan II à Dakar à l'organisation du fleuve Sénégal, qui est un exemple depuis 60 ans de bonne gestion transfrontalière à la fois de barrages et d'un cours d'eau. Sur le Nil, je suis confiant, nous irons à un accord, mais il faut cesser d'avoir une diplomatie agressive. Lorsqu'on est en médiation, on ne fait pas une conférence de presse à la fin de chaque réunion. On travaille discrètement. Et donc c'est tout le sens de l'hydrodiplomatie, c'est tout le sens de la médiation internationale que le Conseil mondial de l'eau appelle de ses voeux.
Thank you very much for this optimistic perspective. Now I will ask a general question to all the participants. Well, this roundtable, as you have seen, brings together the major institutional players in the water sector. And my question to them is how to strengthen cooperation between international organizations and what kind of services are you expecting from Icold? I remind you, it's 1 minute per person because it's we are already late.
Well, I expect really a lot from sister organization like Icold because we rely on water coming most of the time from reservoirs, and we are not in our organization as ICID experts in dams and reservoirs. So that actually complements the work that we do for the irrigation. So the irrigation is our business, but getting the water to the field, This is really requires reservoir and dams, and that's really why we need to cooperate with Icold. And for that reason, I'm here today to sign memorandum of understanding between the ICID and Icold. Less than 1 minute.
Thank you. Oh, you have one.
Okay, thank you very much, and Emmanuel. First, I would like to stress that when it comes to the construction of new dams and the rehabilitation of existing dams, the World Bank has a clear policy to ensure the safety of dams and addressing all risks, including hydrology, geology, seismic, and also civil engineering structures. So we did look at this hydrological risks, including climate change and the sedimentation and so forth. And we have issued this guidelines for sedimentation management, and also the worked together with the IHA for preparing this guides for climate change resilience. So I think these are the very, very important subjects for the World Bank. So we'll continue work with our clients to address these issues. But it is very important for us to work with the Icold because we have a policy and the mechanism, and then provide funds for developing the dams and rehabilitating dams. But we didn't need to get the technical inputs and the feedback from the Icold experts. So really would like to have further enhanced the collaboration and the partnership with Icold, since there are many important technical challenge and also opportunities for us to increase the water storage for hydro and also all other purposes. This is a great important mission for us, so I really look forward to working with Icold and also IHA and other institutions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Can you give the mic to Debbie? Thank you.
Hi, thank you very much. I just want to reiterate what was already said, in that with IHA, we absolutely believe in collaborating with other associations as well as with other concerned stakeholders. As the examples were given by my colleague from the World Bank about the Climate Resilience Guide, I'd like to stress also the Hydropower Sustainability Standard, which I mentioned earlier. That was done with a multi-stakeholder approach, where we have different chambers, and one of the chambers is the International Finance institutions. In fact, the World Bank is the head of that, as well as there's an NGO chamber, and James Dalton is the head of that. So we want to continue working in this manner and perhaps strengthen the links that we already have with Icold. Now, if I can use my remaining perhaps 25 seconds or so to make a pitch as well to the crowd, because I think one thing specifically that we can all do in this room is to get the word out there. I think working with Icold, we can help leverage the message that I brought earlier, and which was brought by other people as well today, that we need more hydropower if we're going to meet our net zero goals. Shout, get the word out there, sign the San Jose Declaration, talk to your local representative, talk to your government representative, talk to anybody who's listening and who cares about energy questions and the energy transition. We have to get the word out there, because, as I said earlier, we cannot make a decision and have a hydro plant in 2 years, or we cannot refurbish a 60-year-old plant in the space of 6 months to increase its capacity. A lot of work has to be done upstream, so I'm counting on all of the people in this room to help get the message out there.
Thank you. So we need to become all ambassadors. Mike, you want to? Oh, yeah. You're from Icold, I think, huh? I think so. Yeah. So maybe not. You don't want to talk about relations.
I
with
expect
Icold.
some cooperation from Icold, because it's an important organization. Oh, here.
Thank you. There's two questions in the question. The first one, how to enforce the international cooperation. Very simple answer: become members of the World Water Council, if you are not. Second question, what are we waiting for from Icold? This is a very serious question. Serious answer is needed. We are waiting in the future that you could be able to bring on the table of the water community and the political community a new kind of dams. I've said we have to be proud to build dams, and we have to say that, to communicate. But we need also to show the politicians, the economic stakeholders, that we are able to design a new generation of dams, more intelligent. I don't know exactly what does it mean. I know that people needs to be intelligent. Dams, I don't know. But more taking in account the evolution of the digital processes and all the innovation which could be bring in this division. That's, I think, what the water community is waiting from Icold and also the decision makers, political and economical one.
You want to say something? I was about to ask for a round of applause, but I got it already. So I will thank all the intervening people here and give the mic to Alison for the third sequence now with the solutions.
So these excellent overviews from these people who play a very important role in influencing water policy and energy policy have taken us to some very specific aspects and challenges facing us today, including not only the need for more storage and clean renewable energy, but also into financial, environmental issues, the need to maximize the benefit of water infrastructure, to safeguard these assets, and of course to keep them safe. So this leads to the clear need, as has just been said, to look at new approaches and technical innovation. And that's fortunate because Luc Dérault will now lead the next section of the discussions, which will take us on a journey through schemes and initiatives in Europe, Asia, Africa, and America. And guest speakers will present very brief snapshots of some innovative approaches being applied. For example, in extending the lives of dams and reservoirs, preserving biodiversity, mitigating the effects of climate change, and integrating renewable energy systems. And these are just some examples which I think are inspirational in terms of embracing new approaches for a new era of water resources development.